You're standing in a marketplace that doesn't exist yet. There's no marketplace. There's no currency. There's no cash register, no coins jingling in a pocket, no wallet, no bank. It's roughly 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the Fertile Crescent, and you have grown more wheat than you can possibly eat. Your neighbor, 3 huts down, has a surplus of goat milk and absolutely no interest in wheat because his own storage pit is already full of it. What do you do? This is the question that has haunted economists for centuries. And it turns out the answer they gave you in school is almost certainly wrong. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Money did not begin with 2 cavemen awkwardly trying to trade a fish for an axe. That story, the one about primitive barter evolving naturally into cash, is one of the most repeated myths in economic history, and it might be almost entirely made up. This is the story of how ancient humans actually invented money. Not the neat, tidy version you got in a textbook, but the strange, messy, occasionally absurd reality of how our species figured out that a shell, a stone, a clay tablet, or eventually a shiny disc of metal could represent value itself. And once you understand how that happened, you will never look at the coins in your pocket the same way again. Let's start by demolishing the myth, because you cannot understand the real story until you clear away the fake one. For hundreds of years, economists from Adam Smith onward told a very simple tale. Before money, there was barter. People traded goods directly, a chicken for a sack of grain, a pair of shoes for a jug of oil. But barter was inefficient because it required what economists call a double coincidence of wants. You need wheat. I have goats, but I don't want wheat. I want pottery. So we can't trade. According to this story, humans eventually got so frustrated with this problem that they invented money as a universal middleman, something everyone would accept, so you could sell your goats for money and then use that money to buy pottery from someone else entirely. It's a clean story. It makes intuitive sense, and there is remarkably little evidence that it's actually how things happened. Anthropologists who have spent their careers studying actual small-scale, pre-monetary societies, from the highlands of New Guinea to indigenous communities in North America, have looked for this pure barter economy that supposedly preceded money, and they have almost never found it. What they find instead is something far more interesting. They find debt. They find memory. They find trust. Picture a small village, maybe 200 people, everyone related to everyone else in some tangled web of cousins and in-laws. In a community like that, you don't barter with your neighbor because you're going to see that neighbor every single day for the rest of your life. If you need a fishing net today and he needs a favor next month, you don't haggle over an exchange rate. You just help each other, and everyone keeps a rough, informal mental ledger of who owes what to whom. This isn't barter. This is a gift economy built on obligation and social memory. Anthropologist David Graeber, who spent years documenting this, argued that this web of informal debt and obligation is actually the true ancestor of money, not barter at all. Barter, when it does happen historically, tends to occur between strangers, between people from different tribes or different societies who have no ongoing relationship and no reason to trust each other, precisely the opposite of the cozy village scenario economists imagined. So if money didn't emerge to fix the barter problem, what problem did it emerge to fix? The answer, it turns out, involves temples, kings, and an enormous amount of barley. Let's go to Mesopotamia, roughly 5,000 years ago, to the world's first cities, places like Uruk and These were not simple farming villages. They were complex, densely populated urban centers with irrigation systems, temple bureaucracies, and enormous stockpiles of grain that needed to be tracked. And tracking things is where the story of money really begins. Because before there were coins, there was accounting. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of clay tablets from ancient Sumer covered in cuneiform script, and a staggering number of them are not myths or poetry or royal proclamations. They are receipts. They are records of debt. This many jars of oil are owed to the temple. This much barley was loaned to this farmer to be repaid after the harvest with interest. The Sumerians developed a unit called the shekel, which originally wasn't a coin at all. It was a specific weight of barley, and later a specific weight of silver, used as a unit of account to measure the value of everything else. You didn't need to physically hand over a shekel of silver every time you made a transaction. You just needed to know that a goat was worth this many shekels, and a length of cloth was worth that many shekels, and the temple would keep the records. Money, in its very first form, wasn't a thing you carried in your hand. It was an idea. It was a unit of measurement, exactly like an inch or a pound, except instead of measuring length or weight, it measured value itself. And this changes everything about how we should think about the invention of money. Because it means the first monetary systems weren't created by merchants in a marketplace. They were created by scribes in a temple, keeping track of who owed what to an institution that had the authority and the permanence to enforce those debts. And this is where things get genuinely dark and fascinating, because debt in the ancient world was not a polite abstraction. If you borrowed grain from the temple or the palace and a drought hit and you couldn't repay it, the consequences were brutal. You might have to hand over your land. You might have to sell your children into servitude. You might become a debt slave yourself. Debt crises became so severe and so socially destabilizing in ancient Mesopotamia that kings periodically had to step in and issue what were called clean slate proclamations, wiping out all outstanding debts and freeing anyone who had been enslaved because of them. The Sumerian word for this kind of debt cancellation was amargi, which literally translates to return to the mother, meaning a return to the original state before debt distorted everything. This same practice echoes centuries later in the biblical concept of the Jubilee year, when debts were to be forgiven every 50 years. So from its very earliest days, money and debt were never just neutral economic tools. They were forces powerful enough to reshape entire societies, powerful enough that rulers needed emergency measures to keep them from tearing the social fabric apart. That's not a small invention. That's one of the most consequential technologies in human history. And it was built out of clay tablets and barley long before a single coin ever existed. Now let's talk about something that might sound almost too strange to be true, and yet it's one of the most widespread and long-lasting forms of money our species has ever used. Shells, specifically. Cowrie shells, small, glossy, oval shells from a sea snail, found primarily in the shallow waters of the Indian Ocean, particularly around the Maldives. For an almost unbelievable stretch of human history, spanning roughly 3,500 years, cowrie shells functioned as currency across enormous parts of the world, from China to India to the Middle East to sub-Saharan Africa. Think about how strange that is. A shell found on one specific set of beaches became a recognized store of value across 3 continents, long before anyone had globalized trade routes in the way we imagine them today. Why shells? Because they had exactly the properties you need in a good currency. They were durable. They didn't rot or decay. They were relatively uniform in size and shape, making them easy to count. They were difficult to counterfeit, since you couldn't just manufacture more of them locally if you lived far from the Indian Ocean. And critically, they were scarce enough in most regions to hold value, but not so rare that they were useless for everyday transactions. In ancient China, the connection between shells and money became so deeply embedded that it's baked directly into the written language. If you look at Chinese characters relating to money, wealth, buying, selling, treasure, an enormous number of them contain the radical for shell, a visual fossil of a monetary system that predates the characters themselves. In parts of West Africa, cowrie shells remained in active use as currency well into the 19th century, meaning this shell-based monetary system outlasted entire empires, outlasted the rise and fall of countless kingdoms, and was still functioning as real, usable money at the same time steam engines and telegraphs were being invented elsewhere in the world. But if you want the single strangest form of ancient money, the one that sounds almost like a joke until you realize how sophisticated it actually was, you need to travel to the tiny Pacific island of Yap, in what is now Micronesia. The people of Yap used, and in a ceremonial sense still use, an object called rye stones as a form of money. These are enormous circular discs of limestone, carved with a hole through the center. And here's the part that sounds made up, but isn't. Some of these stones are massive, up to 12 feet across, weighing several tons. You cannot put a stone that size in your pocket. You cannot even move it without serious effort, a raft, and multiple people. So how does it function as money? Here's the genuinely mind-bending part. The stone doesn't need to move at all. Everyone on the island simply knows, through collective social memory, who owns which stone and how much of its value has been transferred in past transactions. If a family uses a portion of a rye stone's value to pay for something, everyone in the community updates their mental ledger accordingly, and the physical stone might never move an inch from where it originally sat. There is even a famous story, verified by early anthropologists visiting the island, of a rye stone that fell into the ocean during transport centuries ago and sank to the bottom of the sea, where it presumably still sits today. And yet, because everyone agreed the stone existed, agreed on its size and quality, and agreed on who owned it, it continued to function as valid currency, changing hands in transactions despite being permanently underwater and invisible. If that doesn't convince you that money is fundamentally a shared story that a group of humans agrees to believe in together, nothing will. The stone itself was never really the point. The point was the collective, unshakable agreement about who owned what. This brings us to something crucial. Something that connects the barley tablets of Sumer, the Cowrie shells of Africa, and the sunken stones of Yap into a single unifying idea. Money, at its core, isn't really about the object. It's about trust. It's a technology for extending trust beyond the small circle of people you know personally. In a tiny village, you don't need money, because you can just remember who owes whom a favor. But the moment human societies grew larger, the moment cities formed and strangers needed to trade with strangers who they might never see again, that informal system of memory and obligation broke down. You needed something more portable than memory itself, some kind of physical or recorded token that could carry trust across distance and across relationships between people who had no personal history with each other. Grain in a temple ledger worked because everyone trusted the temple's authority and record-keeping. Cowrie shells worked because everyone agreed on their rarity and difficulty to fake. Rye stones worked because the whole community shared an oral and social memory of ownership. In every single case, the object mattered less than the shared belief system surrounding it. And this brings us to metal, and eventually to the coin, the form of money that probably comes to mind first when you hear the word ancient currency. Long before coins existed, as we know them, metals like copper, bronze, and eventually silver and gold were used as commodity money, valued by weight rather than by any stamp design. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, silver by weight became an increasingly common way to measure value for larger transactions, alongside the barley standard. The word for money in Latin, pecunia, comes from the word pecus, meaning cattle or livestock, a linguistic fossil reminding us that livestock itself once functioned as a store of wealth and a medium of exchange across many ancient Indo-European societies. You didn't need to pay a debt in cattle directly, but cattle set the scale against which everything else was measured, much the way barley did in Sumer. The true leap toward coinage as we recognize it happened around the 7th century BC in the kingdom of Lydia, located in what is now Western Turkey. The Lydians had access to a natural alloy of gold and silver called electrum, and they began minting small lumps of this metal into standardized pieces, stamped with an official seal to guarantee their weight and purity. This is the genuinely revolutionary part. Before this, if you wanted to pay someone in silver or gold, you had to weigh it out every single time, and you had to trust that the metal wasn't mixed with cheaper materials. The Lydian innovation was to have a central authority, the state itself, vouch for the value and purity of each individual piece, stamped with a design that was difficult to forge. This meant merchants no longer needed scales and careful verification for every transaction. They could simply count. King Croesus of Lydia became so fantastically wealthy from this innovation and the region's natural gold deposits that his name is still used today in the phrase rich as Croesus. From Lydia, the idea of stamped, standardized metal coinage spread rapidly across the Greek world, then to Persia, then across the entire Mediterranean, fundamentally transforming trade, taxation, and the very concept of personal wealth. For the first time in human history, value could be carried in your hand, counted precisely, and verified at a glance, all because a government was willing to stake its authority on the promise stamped into a piece of metal. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, ancient China was developing its own extraordinary innovations in parallel, sometimes centuries ahead of anything happening in the Mediterranean. Chinese bronze money took strange and wonderful forms in its earliest stages, including small bronze objects cast in the shape of knives and spades. Tools whose original practical function slowly transformed into symbolic monetary value, before eventually standardizing into round coins with square holes in the center, designed so they could be strung together on a cord for easy carrying and counting. And China achieved something even more astonishing centuries later. During the Tang and Song dynasties, Chinese merchants and the imperial government developed the world's first true paper money, originally as promissory notes issued by merchants that were too heavy and cumbersome to carry large amounts of copper coinage across long trade routes. Eventually, the state itself took over the printing of this paper currency, backing it with the promise of redemption in metal coin. This was an enormous conceptual leap, arguably even bigger than the leap from barter to coinage. A piece of paper, worth almost nothing as a physical object, could represent enormous wealth, purely because a trusted authority guaranteed it. When the explorer Marco Polo eventually traveled through China centuries later and witnessed this system in operation, he described it to disbelieving audiences back in Europe as something almost magical. A place where the emperor could seemingly create money out of nothing but paper and ink, and everyone accepted it without hesitation. So what does all of this tell us when you step back and look at the whole sweep of it, from Sumerian barley tablets to Cowrie shells to sunken stones to Lydian coins to Chinese paper notes? It tells us that money was never really invented once. It was invented and reinvented again and again, independently, by different societies facing the same fundamental human problem. How do you extend trust and enable cooperation between people who don't know each other, across distances too great for personal memory to bridge? Every single form of ancient money we've discussed, no matter how strange it looks to modern eyes, was solving that exact same puzzle. And every solution required the same essential ingredient: a shared social agreement that this object, whether it was a shell, a stone, a stamped coin, or a printed note, actually represented something real. Money has never truly been about gold or paper or shells at all. It has always been a story that an entire society agrees to believe together, a collective act of imagination so powerful and so useful that we built the entire modern world on top of it. And the truly wild part, the part worth sitting with as you finish watching this, is that we are still doing exactly the same thing today. Every single time we glance at a number on a banking app and simply trust that it means something real.